Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about a short story by Philip K. Dick called Piper in the Woods, which was published in 1953. It's about an army doctor named Henry Harris who begins to experience this really strange phenomenon in the army. And it all starts with one of the soldiers who has returned from an asteroid called Y3, and it's a strange asteroid because it's uh, abundant with forestry, greenery. It's basically its own planet, its own world. And after the soldier returns from this place, he suddenly starts believing that he's a plant. And of course, the army doctor Henry Harris cannot figure out why. Him and his assistant doctors are trying to get to the bottom of this. And then they discover that more and more soldiers who are returning from this asteroid are all experiencing the same delusion. And eventually, what Henry Harris finds out from them is that, according to them, there is an indigenous people on this asteroid called the Pipers, who live in the woods on the asteroid and who are making them realize that they are plants. So Henry Harris one day goes to the asteroid and he journeys into the woods and discovers that the Pipers do not exist. And I forgot to mention that there's even a very interesting description of these Pipers, with copper-colored skin. They evoke that atmosphere of this sort of pagan, Dionysian feeling about it. A lot of that is my own personal feelings, fascinations, because I've always been fascinated with the nature religions. So he finally figures out that the soldiers are simply creating this delusion to escape from the trauma and the difficulty of their endeavors, like on a regular basis, having to fight in the war. It takes such a toll on them that that's the only way that they can basically escape from reality. And as you would probably expect, when Henry Harris arrives back from the asteroid, he falls into the same delusion, and that's the end of the story. And like many of his stories, this story did give me the creeps on many different levels. But it was also, I would say, mixed with this kind of sense of, like I mentioned, the sense of beauty that the writer also has, that pagan nature sort of atmosphere reminds me of like when I was a child walking around in the woods, and it's that strange sort of ghostly sensation, that I got. That as I got older, I tended to get less of. And you feel, when the soldiers cave into this delusion, you certainly feel that very intensely. But there's also a much darker side of it, that for some reason, I think perhaps because it deals with the horrors and the psychosis, the realities of war. But it reminded me of a dream that I had a few years ago, where I was sitting outside, with a group of these ex-war veterans and an ex-military sergeant, and we were all sitting around having like a barbecue, like just for dinner, and it was summer, and he was telling us all about the stories of having gone there, and there's something in the atmosphere that I felt there that felt almost oppressive. It was strange, like I didn't feel like it was just us, like we weren't alone. It was very, really quite disturbing. And I remember I think the weirdest part of the dream I remember is when he was passing around these blankets that all had this kind of pungent, horrible odor, and the blankets were from the hospitals in which many of the soldiers were cared for. So you can guess, what, I guess what the cause of that smell was, but I guess that there was a sense of emptiness. I noticed in the army sergeant in the dream, there was a sense of they didn't seem, I think perhaps because of the trauma, they emotionally seemed very cut off from what had happened to them. They seemed like they were talking about what they were, like they were talking about what they wanted to have to drink or for dinner, even though they were talking about very serious subject matter. They seemed very detached from it, very robotic. And I noticed that Philip K. Dick will use that, and I think he keeps hammering away that point in many of his stories, because he's trying to show what can happen to people psychologically when they're in a society that has normalized barbarism, but they're trying to find a way to still cope with their everyday lives. And that's certainly the biggest thing that I took away from that story.